Hi, everyone, and welcome to Compliance Panel's live webinar on supplier risk management. My name is David Benjamin, and I'm going to be your host today. And on behalf of the Compliance Panel team, I would like to say thank you for being part of this event. And now today's event will be presented by Mr. Stephen Wolfish. Mr. Stephen Wolfish is the president of Statistical Outsourcing Services, a consulting company that provides statistical analysis and training to the FDA-regulated industries. Now, prior to starting Statistical Outsourcing Services, Mr. Wolfish was a senior manager biostatics, non-clinical at Human Genome Sciences in Rockville, MD. Mr. Wolfish brings over 20 years of industrial expertise in the development and application of statistical methods for solving complex business issues, including data collection, analysis, and reporting. Mr. Wolfish has been an invited lecturer at Medical Design and Manufacturer, MD&M, Institute of Validation Technology, IVT, and Advanced Star conferences. Mr. Wolfish has been a speaker at ASQ Division and Section conferences. He is also an editorial board member of Biopharm International and a regular contributor to the magazine. Mr. Wolfish is a senior member of ASQ, a certified quality engineer and past chair of the Biomedical Division 2006 to 2007. And Mr. Wolfish holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Statistics from the University of Buffalo, Master's of Science in Statistics from Rutgers University, and an executive MBA from Boston University. And now, before we begin, I'd like to inform you of the program outline for this training session. The webinar is for 60 minutes duration. First, Mr. Wolfish will take you through today's webinar, highlighting the areas that will be covered, and then he would share with you his presentation. We would like to inform all participants once part of the teleconference have been placed on mute and will remain so until the Q&A session begins towards the end of the webinar. It is for the purpose of avoiding discontinuity and for allowing our presenter to speak clearly so that everyone present can take maximum benefit from this webinar. We also request all to hold back your questions until the Q&A window begins. 10 minutes of time will be allotted for the Q&A, during which your questions will be answered. And now, if for any reason you get logged out of this training session or the teleconference, we request you to follow the same procedure to join in again. Now that we're all ready to start, I request Mr. Wolfish to take it from here. Stephen?
All right. Thank you very much, David. And I hope that everyone is having a wonderful Tuesday morning. What I'd like to do now is, excuse me, David?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I just heard you talking. Just want to make sure. Okay. What I want to do is take you through a presentation on supplier risk management. The road that we're going to take is going to be more on the CFR 820, which is the device regulations. So 820.50 is the regulation for supplier controls. We'll talk a little bit about the GHTF document. I will then get into the 6 phases of supplier control, the enforcement aspects of it, and then finally we'll talk about supplier metrics. Anywhere along my presentation, if a question does come up, I ask that you use the chat box to send a question. I will then try to reply to those questions while giving my talk today in the hopes of trying to integrate your questions into the presentation and making this a better, more fulfilling presentation for everybody. So for those that are familiar with the regulatory background, this will be a little bit of review. For those that are not, hopefully you'll be able to take something out of this from a regulatory perspective. So the quality system regulation applies to finished device manufacturers. Now, if you're not in the device field, if you happen to be in the pharmaceutical field or if you're in the biotechnology field, imagine that you are looking at any supplier that supplies you a critical raw material. It could be an API. It can be a finished device finished device. It can be anything that you can deem to be critical. In the device world, the key is that most or many device manufacturers actually contract out the parts or all of the manufacturing. So there's a need for you to be able to have in place a very strong control system for your suppliers. The 820.50 says that compliance with the FDA's purchasing controls can be defined into 5 steps. The first thing you need to do is you must evaluate your potential suppliers. Then you need to determine, based on that evaluation, the level of control to exercise over that supplier. Then you need to have a set of records and documentation that's going to occur during the process. Then you need to maintain or disseminate that purchasing information, not just to your supplier, but internally within your organization. And then finally, you have to set your incoming inspection activities such that your risk is mitigated and minimized as best as possible. So let's talk about the supplier evaluation process. What it says is that each manufacturer shall establish and maintain procedures to ensure that all purchased or otherwise received products and services conform to specified requirements. So what does that imply immediately? It implies that in order for you to go out and evaluate a supplier, you must have a pre-specified set of requirements to what you're asking a supplier to supply you. Now, I'm not talking about going out and purchasing, number 10 bolts, because that is, a fairly standard thing. But if you're going to go out and say that I need, and I'll use a pharmaceutical example, I need to go out and get pharmaceutical grade sodium chloride, you need to define what exactly are the tests that you're going to perform and what are the requirements that are necessary in order for me to say that this is the sodium chloride that I need in order to perform my process and to be able to meet my quality requirements. The second thing is that most organizations will have some system that will create procedures for qualifying, disqualifying, and requalifying suppliers. So the fact of the matter is that once you qualify a supplier, you need to also have a way to disqualify them, take them out of the supplier pool, and you also have to have a method for requalifying, or on a regular basis being able to assess if a supplier meets and continues to meet your standards. The key word that we're going to hear a lot today is level of risk, level of risk. The procedures include acceptable quality requirements and actions commensurate with the level of risk to the supply chain or to the patient. Anytime you go to evaluate a supplier, it is critical that you look at what they are supplying, what is the criticality of that product or that service to the overall supply chain, and ultimately to the safety and efficacy to the patient. What are the levels of control that you can have? Well, you can go anywhere from just asking your supplier to provide you a certificate of compliance, certificate of analysis, all the way to requiring that every item that is sent from the supplier is 100% inspected. And that really, regardless of the level of controls, the goal is to mitigate risk. So when we talk about supplier risk management, your goal in setting up your supplier evaluation system is to put in levels of control such that you mitigate any risk that you can mitigate through supplier management. And let me kind of give this to you in a different example so that we can understand it. Because most people don't think of services as a supplier, but they are. And let's just imagine that I contract someone to do cleaning for me. So they're a supplier of cleaning services. And that supplier of cleaning services, you must tell them which, you don't must, and it's a good idea to tell them which chemicals can and cannot be used in the cleaning process. For if they use a chemical that could potentially have an interference with your product, you have risk. So you want to be proactive and say, do not use these chemicals during cleaning because the residual from those chemicals could in some way impact my manufacturing. The third thing we talked about in that 5-step requirement is record keeping. You must have an approved supplier list. You have to have any audits that you performed of that supplier and the performance history. Understand something. The audit reports do not have to be and should never be supplied to the agency. But you need to have a record of your audit schedule. The second thing is an effective record-keeping process to minimize audit findings. So you want to make sure that your record-keeping process for suppliers meets your overall quality system. The third is probably the most important bullet in the 5 steps that the QSR talks about, and that is the approved supplier list has to reflect the corporate policy on numbers of suppliers for a given part number. There are many companies that will write a policy that says that they will sole source for given parts, and then they will go and have multiple suppliers qualified, and they will be supplying for multiple suppliers. Understand that in that case, what you are actually doing is you're violating your own procedure. So if you're a company that has a corporate policy on the number of suppliers for a given part number, you must make sure that your approved supplier list reflects that policy. The next is this idea of purchasing data. Manufacturers are required to establish and maintain documentation that clearly describes the specific requirements, including quality requirements for purchased materials. Typically, how is this done? It is typically done through the purchase order and through contracts. And that is actually how you mitigate your risk, because you define things in the contract or in the purchase order, and now you can say, when I look at the product or service that I'm being supplied, does it meet my purchase order requirements? Understand that you must ask your suppliers to notify you of any process change that involves the product or component. That is also done contractually, as well as sometimes it's done through a PO, but typically you'll write in a contract that says that they are to notify you of any process change. Now, well, how significant of a process change is necessary for them to notify you? And I leave that up to companies to make that decision on their own based on writing their supplier qualification and supplier evaluation procedure. What is a critical process change? Only you can define that, because only you know your processes. The problem you run into is, from a quality improvement and supplier partnership standpoint, it poses a challenge to manufacturers, because you want to partner with your suppliers, you want them to come and help you and give you feedback, but the only way for you to do that is through a framework of some sort of legal agreement, to be able to say that, if you're going to do process improvement and make some changes, which you would like them to do, you want them to improve that process, that they're going to involve you in that process to the best of their abilities, such that it does not violate the contract that you have in place. And then the last thing is the acceptance activities. And typically, the receiving acceptance procedures are well understood. This is, what is the inspection that I'm going to do? What's the test? What's the verification? Now, one of the things that I work a lot with companies on is the idea of, I'm going to do a chemical test. I'm going to do an HPLC method at my facility, and my supplier is going to use that same test method at their facility to release the product. So they're going to do a test to release the product, and then I'm actually going to do a sampling of the product that's coming in, redo that test again at my facility, and I want to make sure that my test results and my supplier's test results are comparable. This becomes really important if you actually start to look at things like lean manufacturing or dock to stock, or any sort of procedure that basically gets the supplier to ship to your facility. You want to make sure that the results the supplier is getting for any test that is being performed, in fact, meets your test requirements for things like precision, accuracy, and linearity. I want you to understand that, yes, everyone talks about we got to do supplier audits. Of course you got to do supplier audits, but that does not guarantee acceptable product. If, in fact, you audit and they have a good quality system, but they don't necessarily follow their quality system, or your audit is ineffective because you can't do a thorough audit, you might be doing a one-day audit or a two-day audit, and you might not get to every quality system that a supplier has, you have to realize that that is not good enough to guarantee acceptable product. And you're going to need to do some income and inspection of your suppliers to mitigate risk. So that's basically the QS Audit 820, and the same principles follow through in the 210 series, and the same principles pretty much follow through in any industry where you're looking to qualify suppliers. Along the way, again, this is for folks who are in the medical device industry more so, but even if you're not, I would suggest you go out and take a look at this document. This is the Global Harmonization Task Force, GHTF, Study Group 3, SG3, Final Guidance called Quality Management System for Medical Devices, Guidance on the Control of Products and Services Obtained from Suppliers. This was basically approved back in early 2009. And the key point that came out of the GHTF document, and I want everyone to understand, is that manufacturers should treat all intra-company suppliers that operate under a separate quality system as a third-party supplier. So if you're a global company and you source some of your raw materials from another division of your company, that division within your company, if they're in a different quality system, is like every other supplier you have. So you have to audit them. You have to have acceptance criteria. You have to have all the purchasing controls that you would have in play. Got a great question, so I'm going to sort of stop here and address a question that came in. Under what conditions can a manufacturer implement a dock-to-stock strategy on a specific part and eliminate income and inspection? And I'm going to give you a statistical answer, and then I'm going to give you a practical answer to that question because it's very important. Statistically, you're going to go dock-to-stock and eliminate income and inspection when you show that the process is stable. And typically, you will say, let's say 20 lots in a row that pass income and inspection. You do an audit, and you find that the quality system is compliant. You will start to reduce inspection. The practical side of it is that when you want to go direct from dock to stock, you're going to do it for non-critical components. If it's a critical component, you might do and reduce your inspection down to an N equals 1, at least doing an identity test. That, yes, I look at, I'm looking for a white powder, that they ship me a white powder. So what I would suggest is that you don't go to a full dock to stock without any sort of investigation. I believe what you need to do is look and say, I've got a very good history with this supplier. I've not had any failures with this supplier. And now I'm going to allow a reduced inspection level to the point where basically all I'm going to do is look at their certificate of compliance, certificate of analysis, and I'm going to do a very quick visual inspection, a very quick one-item inspection, and as long as it still meets my requirements, it's going to be used. And that minimizes the time that that particular raw material or that particular item is held in quarantine. So I hope that answers the question. Okay. What I want to talk about is the 6 phases of supplier controls. The planning phase, the selection of the suppliers, the supplier evaluation and acceptance, the finalization of controls and responsibilities, the delivery measurement and the monitoring, and ultimately the feedback and communication, which also includes the CAPA process. So obviously, the first thing you need to do with anything in life is to plan, right? So you want to have some sort of way of planning how exactly you're going to go forward to pick a supplier. So the first thing you can do is establish controls for supply materials. It is expected that the planning initiates the process. So obviously the company has a need to, in some way, purchase something. And now we're going to kick off the process of finding a supplier for it. So we're going to look at the design plans. We're going to look at quality plans. We're going to look at purchasing plans that have been defined by my quality management system. And we're going to give this particular raw material some sort of risk level. Not everything, has a high risk. And then, by the way, some people will ask when I give this presentation, say, well, what about things like, paper clips? Now, we're not talking about paper clips. We're talking about critical things that in your process, things that, you don't necessarily buy off the shelf, though you can be off the shelf. So if you're buying chemicals that are stock chemicals, you still need to have a certain level of risk associated with it. So the first thing when you do your planning is you have to know what exactly is the risk associated with this particular item I want to purchase. When I go to looking at selection of potential suppliers, the first thing I want to do is assess the business and operational capabilities to ensure that the supplier can provide the quality, reliability, and safety of the product and services. One of the examples that comes around is during development, I need to maybe only buy a very small quantity of this particular product. And so I go to supplier A, and supplier A is able to supply me my quantity to be able to do development. Now I'm out of development and I'm going into full-blown manufacturing. You need to go back and assess, can that supplier supply me the quantity at the quality levels and at the safety levels that I need? It is potentially, it's a very big possibility that the company that supplied you with your development product is not the same company who's going to provide you with your manufacturing scale. So you need to go and determine through document, and you need to document this, what is the criteria and decision rationale. And a lot of times it's a very open and shut case. You go talk to them and you say, look, we're going to need, instead of needing, 50 parts, we're going to need 500 parts, or 5,000, 50,000 parts, and say, well, we don't have the capability. Now, I want to go back and understand during the planning phase, this should not be happening when we're going to switch over to, to manufacturing scale. During development, you should be in discussions with your supplier to say, will you be able to supply us the quantities we're going to need? If not, that's when you start to evaluate and assess alternative suppliers for that particular part number, because you already know that the person who's doing the prototype is not going to be the one who's going to do your manufacturing scale supply. The supply evaluation and acceptance, which really talks about your ability to communicate with your supplier about what exactly are your requirements and for them to come back and help you to refine that. You have to have a set of objective criteria that basically says to your organization and to your supplier or potential suppliers, so remember, we might be evaluating multiple suppliers, that in fact, we want you to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm going to ask 3 or 4 suppliers when I'm evaluating them to be able to provide X, Y, and Z. One of the problems that you run into, and this happens a lot, so I mean, if your organization does this, don't feel in any way embarrassed. But typically, if purchasing gets involved and in the process, they're tasked a lot of times to be cost sensitive. So what they'll do is they will basically, take the specs and say, I'm going to send it out to supplier A, supplier B, and supplier C, our specs, and get a quote back. And they then say, we're going to select the lowest cost supplier. That could be your objective evidence. As long as they're the lowest cost, we're going to do that. But cost is something that must be understood, not in just how much it costs me to procure it, but other costs that can be involved. If they're not, never been audited before, I'm going to have to go out and do an audit. That's a cost. If, in fact, I've never dealt with this supplier before, now my inspection level is going to be higher, I'm going to have a higher cost of inspection. So sometimes the cost for the piece or the part or the chemical or whatever it is that I'm procuring might end up being more expensive because of the total cost associated with the procurement. The finalization of controls and responsibilities. When I'm ready to say, okay, I selected supplier, supplier B is the person to whom I am going to give my business to. I'm going to now put an agreement together with supplier B to procure my product. The thing I want you to keep in mind is that you have to ask them, well, how exactly are we going to do with complaint handling? So if I have an issue with the product, how do you handle my complaint? Or if, in fact, you're buying a product or service that you then resell directly to a final customer and they have a complaint, how do I get back to you their complaints? The second thing is the corrective action and preventive action. Do you, supplier B, have a corrective action and preventive action program that you'll be able to get back to me, the company, the manufacturer, with your corrective action and preventive action for any issues that do arise? The third thing is product risk management piece, which is, is my supplier going to be part of my overall risk management program? What happens when there's a design change? How often am I going to audit you as a supplier? What are my labeling requirements? What's my specification? So as you can see, there are a lot of things that you need to consider when you're getting to the finalization of the controls and who's responsible for what. Because, again, when we're talking about an FDA-regulated industry and you're asking a supplier to supply you something, and this happens a lot in the medical device industry more than anywhere else. You'll go to a supplier who not only supplies to the medical device industry, but they also supply to the automotive industry. They might supply to the electronics industry. An example that just came up not too long ago with a client of mine, they have a printed circuit board that goes into their device. The supplier of the printed circuit board makes printed circuit boards for a lot of different electronics, consumer electronics. When they were having problems, their supplier had no idea of what risk management was for a medical device, none whatsoever. They actually never assessed it. They basically said, well, when we have failures, you return them and we will supply you with a new one. Well, that's not good enough because I have to tell you from a product risk management perspective, failure of your component could put my patient at risk. That's a problem because my risk management program says that I have to mitigate that risk through design control, and I need you as a supplier to participate in that process. And it doesn't always go nearly as smooth as we would like it to be, and I understand that a lot of people who I've dealt with over the years end up getting a lot of headaches from this particular finalization of controls and responsibilities. Delivery, measurement, and monitoring. So, of course, if anyone's familiar with how purchase orders are put together, an accepted supplier shall deliver according to the agreed arrangements and utilized by the manufacturer. Now, one of the things, and I'll talk about this a little later on when I get into the metrics piece of it, is shall deliver according to the agreed upon arrangement and utilized by the manufacturer. If you are a lean manufacturing organization, if I order 50 parts a week, so every Monday you need to send me 50 parts. If the supplier decides to send you 100 parts on one Monday and tells you, well, I'm going to be closed next week, so I'm sending you 100 today so you know that you'll have your 50 for next week, that could become a problem because you're not ready for 100. You might not have the capacity or the ability to quarantine 100 of the parts. You might need only 50 this week and 50 next week. So again, make sure the supplier understands the delivery schedule that it's agreed upon. We have to monitor, and I'm going to talk a lot about monitoring supplier performance to ensure customer regulatory requirements are met. And that, in fact, we need to also do some sort of data analysis of this performance. And one of the things that I want to stress, and we'll talk about this later on, is that most companies, I'm giving you some real live examples, most companies do not trend their supplier performance. Most companies do not look at the acceptance activities and do appropriate data analysis. Most companies release a lot at a time. I receive a lot from the supplier, it passes, it goes into manufacturing flow. Next lot comes, passes. It's not that often that we go back and actually look at the supplier history. And it goes back to the question I was asked before. If I want to work towards a dock-to-stock system, I have to do the appropriate data analysis to show to my organization that the risk of going to dock-to-stock is low because this supplier has consistently delivered a high-quality product, consistently met my requirements, and in fact, at the end of the day, I can show that my performance the supplier's performance meets my expectations. Last piece, the feedback and communication, including CAPA. I'm going to tell you most suppliers do not do a good job of communicating, and it's primarily because most manufacturers do not do a very good job of communicating. That is, most manufacturers, or I believe that manufacturers have to have a system for communicating with the supplier to inform them of the expectations being met, both positive reinforcement as well as negative reinforcement. And I'm going to talk about a supplier evaluation system that I have recommended and used for both giving positive and negative feedback and basically opening up the two-way communication channel between the manufacturer and supplier. Communication is the #1 risk mitigation strategy you can use because if you tell your supplier, hey, I'm doing some monitoring, I'm noticing that the quality is trending down, or hey, you know, I've been working with you for a year now and every lot has been acceptable. I'm very proud, you know, I'm very happy about this. We're going to maybe reduce our inspection. So it goes both ways. And it helps to mitigate the risk associated with the supply chain. If you decide to delegate anything like your CAPA, so you have an open CAPA, you delegate some of that work to your supplier, it has to be documented and defined in the QMS that you have. So it's okay to tell your supplier that, you know, to work on a CAPA for you if you open one up, but you need to document it. I would suggest that you don't delegate it. But if you want to, you can, but just make sure it's documented. Okay. The first half of this talk, I really talked a lot about the guidance documents and some you know, the CFR, the strategies that are necessary. But the reason is this. The FDA has increased its scrutiny of purchasing controls, especially in light of the recent issues. We can sit here and we can talk about, you know, the heparin issue, the peanut issue, the lead in the paint and the toys. We can talk about a lot of issues that have come to light in the last 2 to 3 years with bad supplier and purchasing controls. This is why a lot of people are starting to get all jacked up about, holy cow, I need to reevaluate my supplier evaluation system and determine how much money and time I need to invest in a supplier to improve their quality to an acceptable level. One of the things that you're starting to see now our manufacturers are starting to go back to suppliers and saying, if you don't improve your quality to this level, I'm going to basically stop doing business with you. And typically that, was not always the case. Some manufacturers who are more vested in their suppliers will say, look, your supplier level is below my acceptable level, but I'm going to work with you. So I'm going to send out a quality engineer to work with you. I'm going to, invest in equipment at your facility in order for you to get your acceptable quality levels up. Just understand, this is out of the FDA warning letter database. The warning letters with purchasing control deficiencies nearly doubled between 2006 and 2008. 2006 at 19, 2008 at 35. The last I saw in 2009, that number has exceeded 35 already. So you will see, if you go back to the FDA warning letter database, that in fact the FDA is really looking at making sure you have in place a purchasing control system that is going to be able to monitor my suppliers and be able to qualify my suppliers to be able to meet the quality levels that I have as an organization. So how do we go back and create these supplier metrics? And I think this is the part of the talk where, the first half of the talk is really about the requirements. Now, how do I go do it? Okay, Stephen, how do I do it? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you want to develop a set of appropriate metrics to evaluate and rank suppliers, and you need to do it in a multidisciplinary way. You need to have purchasing involved, quality involved, manufacturing involved, R&D involved, because you need to look at the monetary impact on the company, what would be the impact on the disruption of the supply chain, and understand that my metric has to be applicable to both small and large suppliers. And if it's not, I might have to have two sets of metrics, for small suppliers, for large suppliers. And you also need to have metrics that reflect the risk. Because what you want to do is you want these metrics to go back to your supplier as a way for them to improve their process and facilitate corrective action. Your metrics have to reflect your organizational goals. If you do Six Sigma, lean manufacturing, you're doing cost reduction, you want to make sure your supplier metrics map to those systems. How well does my supplier work in my Six Sigma facility or my lean manufacturing facilities? The key is your metrics have to be quantifiable. They must be SMART, specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely. And that's a very standard game. There are several elements to a supplier evaluation. It must be timely. So evaluation has to be timely. It does no good for you to tell a supplier once a year, and usually we're coming around to that, and it's the end of 2009, and I'm going to send out my evaluation, say in 2009, I bought 40 lots from you, and 38 of those lots passed inspection. Congratulations, good job. You need it to be timely. So it might be quarterly, it might be monthly, depending on the supplier, depending on what it is that you're being asked to supply. The second thing is it's got to be effective. When you do evaluations of your suppliers, it's got to be effective. You can't just go into and say, well, hey, let me take you out for dinner, and over dinner we're going to talk about how things are going. Doesn't work that way, or it shouldn't work that way. The third thing is you need to have a set of audits, including third-party audits of your supplier. And the last piece of the team approach is the monetary impact. How important is this supplier to my company? So we'll talk about each one of them very quickly. I'm going to try to finish up in the next about 8 to 10 minutes to leave time for questions. When evaluating suppliers or contractors, can they meet your quality requirements? Can they meet their schedules? Remember I asked you before, I said in development I have a supplier, and now I'm going to manufacturing, and the question is, can you meet my schedule? I'm going to need 5,000 parts every month. Can you meet that? Does your system allow for me to have a lean manufacturing pull system? So In fact, you will have, I'm going to be making 5,000 of these parts a month. I don't want you to ship me, I'm going to be making 5,000 finished components. I don't want you to ship me 5,000 of my sub-assemblies. I'm going to pull that system. So are you set up to allow me, if in this week I need 2,000 and in the next week I only need 1,500, to get a varied flow of product? So does their production schedule fit your new manufacturing pull system? So that's the timeliness aspect of it. The effectiveness is, how does your supplier communicate issues? Does your supplier have their own CAPA system? And if so, again, can I see how they deal with problems? Can you trust your supplier to go and investigate issues? So how effective are they at, or how responsive are they to the issues that you might have? Do I need to do an on-site audit for the supplier? If I don't, what can I do? Can I do due diligence? Can I send use a third-party audit? Can I look at, as was brought up, can I look at historical data and say, based on historical data, I'm not going to audit them? What happens when you audit them and you have too many findings? So you come in and you say, okay, I'm going to do an audit, and now you find out, holy cow, their system is way out of whack. What do I do? You have to have a remediation plan in place. You have to work with them to say, okay, look, these are issues that we identified. Now, your supplier might say to you, well, that's great, but you are a small customer to us, and we're not going to remediate to the level you want. So who do you then share these results with? Well, if you're a big company, and this is where size has its benefits. If you're a big company with multiple divisions, and your division happens to be a small customer to them, and they're not going to remediate to the level you want it to be done, you might want to share those results within your company. You might want to share your audit results with your supplier. You might decide that you're going to only do a high-level audit and response. So it depends on the level of auditing you're going to do, and it's also going to depend on who you're going to ultimately share those results with. The monetary impact. How much rework or rejected product do you get from the supplier? What is the loss, or what's the cost of later early shipments? Do you pay a premium for the product or service? And maybe a different supplier that I can evaluate, I wouldn't have to pay a premium. Are you seeing an increase in field service or returns or complaints? One of the things that I will tell you is you should be able to see a direct mapping between your income and inspection results and your field service and returns or in-process failures. The fact of the matter is, unless you're doing 100% inspection, if you see about 5% of your lots fail, I would expect to see an additional 5% of my lots failing either in process or out in the field, because I'm not going to capture all of the failures during inspection. Ranking of suppliers. It is desirable to rank suppliers based on this. It's extremely important for you when you evaluate the suppliers that you have a tiered system. High-risk supplier, supplier of high-risk components or high-risk raw materials, medium risk, and low risk. And then within each of these categories, you rank your suppliers. And use your ranking system not to go out and to chastise suppliers, but use it to determine how, as an organization, you want to divvy up your resources to help support your suppliers. Remember, your ranking system can be used to reward the good suppliers. Now, I used to say every time I walked into a manufacturing facility, I always looked in the reception area, because a lot of companies like to put up their little plaques that they get from either their customers or their suppliers for being, an A1 supplier or a top-notch supplier, and they like to put it up there. Okay, so a lot of companies do that, and I'm not going to say that's a bad thing, but just because someone's a good supplier this year doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a good supplier next year. So I think it's important for you to use the rankings to reward good suppliers, to tell them, hey, you're doing a good job, keep it up, but also to use it to determine how I'm going to take my resources that I have for supplier support to get my suppliers up to the level of quality I need. Remember, this process is extremely expensive to qualify a new supplier. If I've had a supplier who's supplying me something, their quality level drops off and it's below the level that I have set for my organization, and I wanted to get a new supplier, it's an expensive process. So again, here's just a couple of things you might want to throw into the metric system. You might look at on-time shipping as a metric. Obviously, shipments within the schedule window, first-pass acceptance, full quantity, and then negatives would be things that come in late, partial shipments, rejected lot, things of that nature. The evaluation part of it, positives is that I have no in-process of failures. I have, good audit reports, what have you, and typically the negatives are the opposite of that when I have some sort of failure in process. The audit, positive is no audit findings. The fact is that I now have them on a certificate of compliance. I don't even have to do incoming inspection. Those are positive things for the metric. The negative is that I have too many findings, or I have too many, I've had to increase my inspection because of the findings that I had during the audit. And then finally, the monetary piece of it, what's the low cost provided, the total cost. And if anyone has been around long enough to remember the days of quality costs, you had inspection and prevention type costs, look at the total cost of obtaining, procuring a product or a service. Sometimes what you believe to be the low-cost provider is the one with the highest total cost. So let me just sort of conclude, and then we can open it up to questions. Right now, the FDA is viewing purchasing controls as a very hot topic. You need to have in place a system that you can evaluate and qualify suppliers, as well as to re-qualify suppliers. It has to be objective. You have to set quality objectives, objective criteria. Now, one of the things that I'm going to sort of conclude with is a little bit of a story of a company I worked with, which thought that they were doing it right, and in the end were actually doing it wrong. And this is what they did. They had a process by which when the supplier sent them a lot of material, they would go to their ANSI Z1.4, that's inspection for attributes, and they said, okay, you're shipping me 5,000 parts, I'm supposed to take 32, none of them are supposed to be defective. They took their sample, the lot passed, and they said, oh, well, this is good because you're meeting my quality standard of an AQL of 1.0. And every lot the supplier sent them passed, and they said the supplier's quality was great because it met their AQL level of 1.0. The only problem was they had a lot of complaints in the field. And I sat there and I was working with them, and I asked them a simple question. I said, answer me this question. What are you inspecting for? And they had a list, and they showed me their procedure and said, we inspect for this, this, and this. And they all have to pass. And I asked them a question. Do those things that you're inspecting for, do they tie directly back in to the quality of the product and to this use of the product in the field? That is, are these critical quality parameters or quality attributes? And they had no idea. So understand that when you're evaluating a supplier, you need to, back in the planning phase, know what it is about that particular component, that raw material, that is critical, quality-wise, to performance of the product or the process. If you're measuring the wrong thing based on what your supplier gives you, you might actually think they're meeting your quality requirements or your quality levels, but in fact they're not. And so it's important to understand that difference. So with that, I'm going to open up, give it over back to David to open it up for any further questions.
Stephen, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. And I would also like to thank all participants for cooperating with us. It is now time for the Q&A to begin, and we request all who have questions for our presenter to click on the raise hand option, which is a palm-like icon at the bottom of your participants panel, to ask your questions verbally or post your questions in the Q&A panel so that our presenter can read it aloud once and then answer. For any reason, if you're unable to ask your question using either of the two means I mentioned, I request you to share it with me, your host, by chat, and I shall pass it on to a presenter to answer it. Meanwhile, we sincerely request you to share your feedback in the feedback form that will appear on your screen in the polling window right now. And the feedback form is just 6 questions, mostly multiple choice in nature, and wouldn't take more than a minute to answer them. And Stephen, could you see a question on the Q&A panel?
Let me go back. You put me in full screen.
Question is from Shane.
Sorry about that. Okay, yes. So so the question is, under what conditions is it valid to buy material to a third party and give that third party the responsibility to evaluate and monitor these suppliers? So, if I understand the question correctly, what we're saying is you actually have a distributor who distributes another company's product. And I'm asking the distributor to evaluate and monitor these suppliers. And it's not an easy answer, but I'll give you the answer as the best way I understand the approach. And that is to say, if you are the one who has your name on the product, you are required to evaluate. So if you want to give that responsibility over to a third party to do, that's fine as long as you audit the third party. So imagine now that you have, and I'm going to use Fisher or VWR, or, any of these big chemical houses, Sigma. They're going to actually supply you with multiple different things ultimately from different manufacturers. You only have to make sure that Sigma's, quality system is up to your criteria, and then you can give them the responsibility to evaluate and monitor all of the other suppliers. So as long as their system meets your requirements, you are free to allow someone else to monitor the monitoring of the suppliers. Does that answer the question for you?
Shane, I've opened your line. Could you come onto the line?
Yeah, that answers the question perfectly. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. Thank you.
But you got to make sure. I mean, if you turn it over to someone, you have to be really sure that their quality system is good. So I mean, that's but yes, you can do it.
And in that case, I guess you would that particular distributor may have a higher risk rating because they're managing multiple suppliers.
Bingo. That's exactly the answer. And that's exactly how you approach it. You are now a critical supplier because you supply me 8 different things. And if any one of them fails, I'm in trouble. So you're a high risk. Even though each individual component's a very low risk, the combined effort now becomes high risk. So I like that, yes, and an excellent approach. Let's get to the next question that's here. What would you recommend as a good approach for partnering with a sole source supplier? Well, unfortunately, I don't have with me my cadre of colleagues, but one of them who I deal with, she is the head of quality for a very small supplier. They actually make a single product, and they only have 2 customers that buy that product. And she gives a great talk on exactly how do you go about partnering with these type of things. And the key is you have to be able to understand the culture and the climate of your sole source. If they're a small company but and they make a niche product, and they're the only ones who make it, and that's who you have to work with, you need to invest a lot of time and money, if you're the bigger company, in getting their quality systems up to speed. Typically, what I have seen done, and I think it works very well, is you have quarterly meetings with that supplier to basically tell them the deficiencies of what's going on and the things that are going well. The best way I can say about partnering with a sole source supplier is to communicate effectively with them in a timely fashion as to when things are going right and when things are going wrong. The next question was, what requirements change when a medical device company distributes another's product? Okay, so the medical device industry is very specific. The company who has their name on the device is the one that's responsible for the supplier controls. So if Ajax company is on the device, they're on the hook for the evaluation of the supplier controls. If I decide to distribute Ajax products, I have an agreement with Ajax to distribute their product. I'm not a supplier, okay, of Ajax. Ajax is on the hook. They have to qualify me to distribute their product. So Ajax would then come to me and say, Stephen, we need to evaluate your quality systems that you can be qualified to distribute our product. And I'm not sure I'm answering the question perfectly the way you want, but basically the requirements don't change. It's only if Ajax allows me to redistribute their product with my name on it. So now it's really an Ajax product, but I put Stephen on it. Now I'm selling it out there. Stephen is selling it. Now I have the responsibility as a medical device manufacturer to follow the QSR, and I also have the responsibility to make sure that the supply chain is done correctly. So if I'm going to take over relabeling an Ajax product, I have to take on a lot more responsibility for supplier control. Do you have any recommendation as to what standard to audit a supplier to if they do not comply with medical QSR requirements, for example, the 1345 or the 820? If, in fact, and this is a big thing now, actually, companies are going around telling their suppliers that they have to come 1345 certified, which is there's no requirement that they do that. If, in fact, you're dealing with a supplier that supplies multiple products to multiple industries, and you just happen to be a medical device manufacturer that buys from them, they might not be 1345 compliant. They might not. They might not be 1345 certified. The second point, also, if you are going to be a medical device manufacturer, the 21 CFR 820 is a requirement. So typically what you will do is you will take the QSIT document and the QSR document, the QSR document that the FDA publishes, and that's a system you're going to audit them to. So they might not be 1345, but at a minimum, they must follow the QSR, the quality system regulations. So that's a minimum requirement. I would suggest that even if they're not 1345 certified and don't actually have a 1345 system, you audit them to that 1345 and let them know where the deficiencies are and work with them as to what the remediation is for deficiencies. You will find that a lot of companies, even though they're not 1345 compliant and certified, that if you audit them to that standard and you do a good job, you'll find out that they'll be willing to make the slight modifications to get into compliance. I have no other questions. I don't know if there are any other questions there, David.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Mr. Kipling would like to ask a question verbally. Joe, your line is open.
Oh, yes, thank you. I've got a question regarding risk and the different methods to identify risk, whether it's FMEA or other matrices that people use. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Sure. So, during the design phase, and I was restricted to analysis. I couldn't get into an awful lot of that phase, but during the design phase, typically you'll do a risk analysis, which will include an FMEA. And typically what people will do is they will create an internal thing called a risk index. I've seen it done a lot of different ways, 0 to 100, 0 to 1,000, 0 to 25. It really doesn't matter. But you basically create a risk index, and within your risk management program, your 14971 program, you will say that any risk that's lower than, I'm going to use a 25-point scale, so it's a 5x5 grid for severity and then occurrence. So it's occurrence and severity, 5x5 grid. Anything that's lower than a 5 is going to be acceptable risk. Anything that's above a 10 is going to need to be mitigated, and anything between a 5 and a 10 is going to be in that sort of equivocal zone of acceptable risk. Now, the problem you run into is, so how does that translate into supplier quality management? Because during the FMEA and during this risk assessment and the risk index, one of the things that might come up is, if this raw material, if this component fails, it's going to give me a high risk. Now that component becomes critical. So you have to link your FMEAs, your risk process, back into your supplier by saying those things that are identified as high risk or high potential for failure, I have to put in more restrictions with my supplier. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
All right, Stephen, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have any further questions, I request you all to send it to me, david@compliancepanel.com, and I'll pass it on to a presenter and get back to you as soon as possible. In the meantime, I request you sincerely to give us your feedback if any of you have not given us your feedback. And ladies and gentlemen, we're very grateful for your participation in this webinar. If you would like to get in touch with us, or you can send us an email at webinars@compliancepanel.com. Stephen, with your permission, could we conclude this session? Would you like to say something in conclusion?
Well, I want to thank everyone. I ask that if questions do come up, please get them along to David, who will forward them to me. I do the best job I can to get back to people as fast as possible with answers. And if I don't have the answer, I'd be more than happy to go into my cadre of colleagues who are will be able to get us, not just the right answer, but probably get the FDA approved answer. So whatever I can do, please feel free to use me as a resource.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And dear attendees, if any of you feel that your team members, colleagues, friends might benefit from this event, we're happy to inform you that it will be available in the recorded format and can be bought from our website, or you can call us at 800-447-9407 or 714-441-5856. We welcome your suggestions and feedback or ideas on how we can improve our webinars. If you'd like to suggest a topic or desire a customized corporate training on-site or online, we ensure that whatever is your training necessity, it will be a priority. We look forward to having you with us sometime soon again and for your continued patronage. And on behalf of our presenter, Mr. Wolfish, and the compliance panel team, I would like to say thank you for participating in this webinar and wish you all a pleasant day ahead.
Thank you.